Welcome everyone to the webinar. We're going to wait a minute or two to let everyone join before getting started. I think we'll get started here in about 2 minutes, but sit tight. We've got a really exciting, kind of presentation for today, and thank you so much for joining us. Thanks everyone who's just joining us. I think we're going to get started here in about 30 seconds. So let's just wait another second for folks to trickle in, but really excited to kick this off. All right, I think we've reached a critical mass. Why don't we get started? If we hop to the next slide, really excited. We're going to be talking about the state of academic operations and student success today. I'm going to be your moderator. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Justin Wenig. I'm co-founder and CEO of Coursedog. My story started about 5 years ago. Computer science student at Columbia University, got frustrated while trying to enroll in I guess I was just spotlighted, which is awesome. Got frustrated while trying to enroll in the computer science classes that I wanted to take, and set off on a journey to try to understand how do universities manage their academic operations, from course proposal to academic scheduling based on student demand to student planning, and founded Coursedog that solves some of those issues. But I'm also incredibly grateful to be joined by Wendy Kilgore today. So Wendy, I'd love for you to introduce yourself to everyone who's here with us.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. Pleasure to be here. I'm Dr. Wendy Kilgore. I'm the Director of Research at the American Association of Collegiate Registrars and Admissions Officers, and been serving in capacities at AACRAO since 2009, including consulting and the role I'm currently in. And prior to that, had the privilege of being in a large community college system in Colorado and at Comprehensive Arizona State University in various roles that have led me to where I am today. Justin is going to summarize a lot of excellent research that they've been doing, and they sponsored some of the research for AACRAO to do on this subject as well. I'm going to just post in the chat for everybody the link to the AACRAO specific report that's available to you, even if you're not an AACRAO member, because we will be talking about some of that data, not exclusively today, but some of it. So thank you, Justin.
Awesome. All right, let's set the agenda. So before we dive into things, I want to quickly provide an overview of what we're going to talk about today. First, I wanted to make sure that we're defining academic operations and making sure that we're all on the same page about what this term means. We'll then spend some time diving into specific areas of academic operations to learn more about how they currently run and how they're connected to student success. We'll talk about curriculum and catalog management, and then move into how schools think about projecting course and academic program demand for financial sustainability and student success. And finally, we'll look at barriers institutions experience trying to execute their academic operations and where there are opportunities for improvements. We'll leave time at the end for questions, but of course, if you have any questions for us throughout the presentation, feel free to submit them in the Q&A function that you can find at the bottom of your screen. I'll just say this is the most exciting. I've done a lot of webinars, and this is the one I'm probably the most excited for, not only because we have an incredible attendance for today's webinar, but also because I think the research findings are truly novel and really, really exciting. So again, feel free to submit questions via the Q&A function you can find at the bottom of your screen. And last, we're going to be doing some polls throughout the session. And we're really looking forward to getting your perspective on this topic and learning about how your institution approaches these important areas. So with all of that out of the way, let's jump into our first section. We're going to define academic operations and what lives under this umbrella term. We'll also look at how it connects with student success and why we're focusing our attention here at all. So what makes up academic operations? AACRAO recently conducted a study on academic operations that looked at benchmarks and ties to student success. And in this survey, they defined academic operations as including functions such as curriculum management, catalog administration, classroom space management, course scheduling, demand analytics for academic offerings, and degree audit management. And this is a lot of what we'll be spending our time here today looking at. Curriculum, catalog, course, and program demand analyses, and where a lot of you were able to chime in from this research. So we know at many institutions, though, academic operations encompasses several other functions. You'll see that around roughly 80% of the institutions that completed the survey also included accreditation compliance, faculty management and hiring, and transfer articulation under the umbrella of academic operations as well. And due to the wide scope of these activities, it's no surprise that many institutions reported that they have strategic enrollment management initiatives related to academic operations. In fact, 38% said they did. And I wouldn't be surprised if the number is even higher, given the wide scope of what academic operations really entails. So, okay, great. We, have this kind of, research-like definition, we're going through the university process, this is all great, but what's the connection to student success? So we continually ask our administrators, about how this played out at their institutions. And these are some of the responses that we've gotten. We know the way the course schedule is designed can impact students' access, especially for students from an underrepresented backgrounds. These first two comments note that course availability and conflicting course times prohibit students from taking the class they need. And the quote at the bottom is from a University Business article that I read recently, and it says that while almost every student and advisor uses the catalog to select courses and plan pathways, the catalogs change very little over the years. And that's, I think when we saw how much schools think about, assessment and accreditation, I think a lot of folks think of the catalog as that sort of document. And, it's interesting because while students are used to, navigable online solutions everywhere else in their life, the catalog rarely kind of meets those expectations. So, Wendy, I'd love to kind of get your thoughts here, from your perspective and from AACRAO, how do you think about the connection between academic operations and student success? And do any specific examples come to your mind from your experience or work with AACRAO members?
Certainly. When I think about operations and student success, it's one of those units and collections of units, because they're often separate parts of the institution, that do a lot of work behind the scenes. There's not a lot of engagement directly with students. So sometimes there may not be the perception that there's a lot of student success tied to this. But when you're talking about curriculum management, catalog development, the schedule of classes, all of those things have to be functioning well and in a timely manner and have really clear policies and procedures in order to support student success. As you mentioned, their ability to get their classes on time, to be able to graduate on time, to understand what their path is that they're trying to take down the academic career that they're going on. So it's really important that those things that aren't seen by very many people, externally, that they run really well. And by that, I mean that they talk to each other. They take a look at the data that supports what students want to do, need to do, or looking forward to doing in their curriculum pathway through the institution, that they're talking about with admissions and recruiting information staff, that we're doing these changes in a timely manner so we can send that out to new students who are trying to enroll at the institution. So it's integral. All of these components are very strongly tied to student success on campus because it's the backbone of moving them through the institution in a lot of ways. And so it's important. When we work with our members, the ones that do it well are the ones who have taken advantage of some of the more recent technologies to help streamline and remove the manual processes to these things. And those who also apply analytics. They take the time and have the resources, which is a challenge for some, to take the data, look at it, understand what it means, and take that back to the key decision makers and say, we're finding these things are working well, and these things might need to be improved about all of these different academic operations processes.
Wendy, thank you for that amazing summary. So how do these concerns play out and impact students, at the campus level? AACRAO also asked this question in the same survey that I just referenced, and overall, 90% of the respondents agreed that barriers in academic operations impact students. The number one barrier reported was limitations to how we make students aware of these policies and practices, which I thought was fascinating and actually was not what I expected. Would be curious if anyone here expected that. But other top concerns included, lack of technology to support academic operations functions and lack of clarity in related policies. Implementing good policies and, projecting demand and things that we'll look at later are very difficult without strong technology. And a lot of these things like scheduling, and curriculum catalog are very good problems for a computer to solve. So, I know these concerns can look different in terms of how they play out at different institutions. So I want to do a poll here and learn more about what this means for your institution. So we're going to start this poll. You'll see, the polls up on the screen. This is poll number 1. And the question is, what does limitations to how we make students aware of these policies and practices mean to you? I'd love to learn how this resonates with you on your campus as what we heard from AACRAO members as kind of this top response. So we're launching this poll now. We're going to leave it open for about 60 seconds or so. If we missed any limitations in the answer choices here, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We'd love to get the chat going, and let's see what comes through. I'm going to do my own vote. So we'll just leave this open here for about another 30 seconds so that folks have some time to answer that poll. And we hope you guys like the dog graphic on the slide. We chose that over elevator music, so we hope that's appreciated by the audience.
I think he or she is adorable.
All right, so we just got these poll responses. So fascinating. So 73% of you said difficulty or inconsistency communicating policies and changes to students. Tied for second, students unaware of changes made to the curriculum and students unaware of policy changes made. I think that it's really hard, I think, to communicate curricular changes that impact students, because I think most institutions that I speak to oftentimes don't know how curricular changes impact themselves from a student success perspective, from an equity perspective, from a financial sustainability perspective. And so I'm not surprised that, so many folks are feeling that pain. Wendy, what's your impression of this?
The data doesn't surprise me as well. Communication sort of across the board, and we're finding in these back office things across the universities, not just academic operations, tends to be the biggest challenge. Is the how and when and in what format, and how do you ensure that they understand it and they've read it or looked at it? Because there's all those challenges that even if you send them a text or an email, do they truly open it, read it, understand it? And then there's the nuance. So there's the policy changes that happen across years. So even if students talk to each other, one student's catalog of record may have certain policies, and the person they're talking to may actually have slightly different policies or changes. And so we have that nuance in it as well. It makes it challenging.
Totally. And a couple of things that I'll just call out from the Q&A that I thought were fantastic points. Joyce called out, students don't access flat content. It needs to be fed to them more just in time and contextualize information, which I thought was a really, really good point. And, you know, another challenge is that all of this is written in terms that are not well understood by students. Very good points. And, you know, for those of you, if the chat is disabled, I did just see some feedback on that. Just use the Q&A, you know, even if you have points, and I'd love to be able to raise them throughout the presentation. So thanks for your responses, everyone here. You know, to shed a little more light on this topic, I wanted to share some results from a university business survey earlier this year. You know, this is a really exciting data set of hundreds of different campuses, which is really amazing. And similarly, the survey asked about how barriers in academic operations impact students. And you'll see that changes to curriculum and how they're communicated with students was a major concern of respondents. 63 reported that students are unaware of these changes made, that the curriculum and how it impacts them. This makes sense considering 48% reported that curricular changes are not always accurately reflected on program maps, completion audits, the websites, or other student-facing sources. You know, I've met, you know, 5 campuses that, you know, in total that are like, yeah, we have really awesome program maps. We have really awesome guided pathways. You know, it seems like for so many campuses, this is a continual work in progress. And so given it seems like this is such a major area of concern, I wanted to spend the next section talking a bit more about curriculum change processes at institutions and kind of go into the details. And I just want to share another note that just came through the Q&A. This is, yeah, the catalog is written how faculty and staff understand it, not how students understand it. You hit the nail on the head. And you know, I think when it's a tough thing, because if you don't have the right tools on campus, and you know, these curriculum catalog scheduling processes, they're very anxiety inducing. You know, finishing a schedule last minute or getting your catalog out is a consistent, incredibly frustrating and anxiety producing thing for folks on the ground. And so it's hard to fault people for not spending the extra time to go make a beautiful degree map. But let's talk about those curriculum change processes and how they relate to the catalog and what actually shows up for students. So for the catalog, we'll look at when it's typically published, you know, what information lives in it, and, you know, let's talk about the life cycle. So on the top right, proposing a curricular change is really just the first stage in the life cycle, right? Of course, a lot goes into proposing, evaluating, approving new curricular offerings, the governance process that's around that. You know, but it doesn't stop there. Once new curricular offerings are approved, it needs to be pushed into the newest version of the catalog so students, faculty, and staff can access it. And I'm sure lots of you have fun thinking about effective dating and all of that lovely stuff that a good registrar has, tattoo on their sleeve. But you know, the registrar's office and department schedulers also need to access that most up-to-date curricular information, which is often stored in a kind of dinosaur-esque format in your SIS to know which courses to schedule, so students can access and enroll in the newly offered courses and programs. And from there, the new curricular offerings should hopefully be evaluated at regular intervals to monitor success and what, if anything, needs to be changed. And you know, once a needed change is identified, the whole thing starts all over with the curricular change process. It's like the circle of life. But as many of you who are on the ground know, this is a lot to juggle, and just keeping information accurate and, you know, making sure that things talk nicely with whatever SIS you're using is a battle in and of itself. So, you know, we asked the question, how are institutions thinking about managing their curriculum change process? So we're going to start by talking about the timing of the process and the way that it actually works. So let's talk about, AACRAO's recent survey found that while 33% of institutions only allow course changes once a year, and 47% only allow program changes once a year, more than half of institutions allow course and program changes more than once a year. So almost half allow unlimited course changes each year. While it's wonderful to continually innovate the curriculum and align it with current student and employer needs, you know, I asked some of you, what does this mean in practice when it comes to publishing the catalog and keeping students informed of changes? And I think this points, you know, to a major need for institutions to really examine these curriculum and catalog processes and how they're connected to make sure that students are being served well through these processes and the information is useful. So let's take a look at the kind of timeline of catalog publication now. So, we want to make sure students always have the most up-to-date information through the catalog, but surprisingly, this doesn't always occur. So consider the timing of academic matriculation. On a traditional admission cycle, most students, will have already been admitted and enrolled by the time a catalog is published in the summer or fall. And the same survey here found that 84% of institutions publish an academic catalog once a year, while only 7% revise the catalog on a rolling basis, which I actually think is really fascinating for those of you that are kind of doing that and publishing addenda or things of that sort. And given this, 54% of institutions do not have an approved catalog before students are recruited and admitted to that catalog year. That to me was actually very shocking. Wendy, I know AACRAO did a webinar a few months ago to discuss these findings, and this finding about the catalog was a big topic of conversation among your research advisory board members, and I know some of the most innovative institutions at AACRAO. What do you think of the fact that over half of institutions don't have a catalog approved before students are recruited or admitted? Is this a problem? Were you surprised by this finding? What are your thoughts?
It really depends on the nature of the curriculum, how much it changes at the institution. So as you pointed out, sometimes it changes a lot from year to year or multiple times a year. So if it's an institution that doesn't have particularly substantive changes that impact a student's decision about enrolling at your institution, like time to degree or number of credit hours required, or maybe a change that requires a student to take different courses that they've already taken because they were going to transfer into your institution, that's when the timing becomes a little bit more concerning to me and others, that it should be out so students, if they know where the resource is there, so that students can say, hey, this is my guide, this is what I understand I'm going to be held to and I need to do, and the policies around it. But if the curriculum does not change a whole lot, I think that might be, and we don't know because we haven't done the data analysis, that might be where this timing is not as important, because it's basically fixed, right? It's gone from one year to the next and very little, or if anything, has changed. So it's kind of this mixed thing. We don't quite know. I mean, right off the top, I agree with you. Go, whoa, wait a minute. We want to have that out there so we can recruit public students from it. But it may not be as concerning as it first appears, just because we don't know how much of the people that fall into that category are catalogs that are fairly fixed. So I would, just want to summarize it by saying, if your catalog changes a lot, you should publish it early. You should get it out there before your admissions and recruitment team are out there trying to recruit people to it, and your transfer advisors are trying to advise people to it, and all of those things. It just makes good sense from a student success standpoint and a clarity of expectation standpoint for those incoming students.
Yeah, Tracy has a great question here asking, is it a best practice for academic departments to notify curriculum changes to their students, or should that communication come from the registrar and or student success office? So I'm going to give you a non-answer, but I think it's a really, this is, I think, part of this investigation. What we'll go into in a little bit is, students, these digital first students, that, have, really are expecting these great user experiences and, are already probably experiencing information overload on campus. This really comes down to me for a question about usability and the way that we present information to students, right? Because it's not always, I think, like Wendy just said, it's not, if we're dumping tons of information that's not useful or superfluous, that doesn't benefit anyone, right? But when there are things that are important, it's really, I think, a critical part of an effective curriculum catalog process that we're able to communicate that effectively. And if the process itself is broken, or there's significant just-in-time stuff, which is another question that we're getting here, you run the opportunity where you're going to have those critical mishaps that are going to impact student progression and your enrollment funnel as well. So let's start a poll. This is a great, kind of conversation topic. I'd love to hear about how you're seeing the connection between curriculum and catalog processes play out on your campus. Please select how your institution approaches aligning these two processes. So the question is, are your curriculum change processes / timelines aligned with when the catalog is published? So let's go ahead and launch the poll now. We'll leave it open for about 60 seconds and we'll hop back in a sec.
Justin, can I add something to the communication discussion?
Absolutely.
So what we find is effective, at least models of communication to students, is several components. Is actually there's a kind of a centralized communication unit that helps organize all of these things that all the different departments want to tell students. So there's key people in charge of managing all those communication messages and channels and deciding with policy and practice rules what goes out, when it goes out, and how it goes out. So it doesn't really matter if it comes from academic operations or from registrar, but as long as it follows a pattern and the students are expecting that communication is the best way, I think, to communicate any of this, and that they're reading it or taking action.
Yeah, and Joyce has an amazing question here, and we'll get to the poll results in a second. She says the curricular changes are often just in time in the faculty mind, so delaying implementation for student communication and onboarding is a difficult tension to manage. And I'm hopeful for folks who are here in the webinar today that this provides some fuel to take these processes seriously, right, from the student's lens. Because if we purely look at these processes as back office, accreditation, a lot of things, we're going to have these challenges, and it's going to be hard to get buy-in from faculty and executives about, why we need to have a better process. So it's a great point. So I guess I overextended my welcome on the poll, but most of you said yes, but a good percentage said no. Wendy, any feedback? I didn't know if you had the chance to see that. I think it was 51%, 34% or something of that sort, but really interesting.
It's fairly reflective, I think, because of the percentage of not sure. So you probably, if the not sure is new, it'd probably fall into about half and half again, because it's something we've seen over time. It hasn't really changed.
Totally makes sense. So let's talk about what we're talking about when we talk about the catalog. So some people like to say catalog, some people like to say bulletin. Some people like to say the minimum amount possible. AACRAO asked the roughly 220 institutions that participated in their survey what was included in the catalog at their institution. And of course, items that you'd expect, such as course descriptions and degree offering, topped the list. Was even surprised to see some institutions didn't have that information, but also there were many other types of information included, information such as learning outcomes, program pathways, and various policies. We couldn't fit all of the information in the catalog on one slide, but between this slide and the previous, there are 15 different types of information included in a college or university catalog. And I'm sure this doesn't even cover everything. But on this slide, you'll see other types of information in the catalog include the academic calendar, accreditation information, the names of faculty member, and admissions criteria. All this makes me wonder, who has actually read an entire catalog? I suppose potentially many of us on the line that work in the registrar's office or other related academic units have gone through the extravagant process of line by line, looking at a catalog PDF or something of the sort, but maybe not many others. And this kind of gets us to the point about information overload. Given how much is included in catalogs, how long do they typically run? So on this slide, you'll see data from a study conducted by Dr. Terry O'Banion and Dr. Cindy Miles. Drs. O'Banion and Miles examined catalogs at 30 community colleges and came across some pretty interesting findings. On average, the catalogs that they examined ran 319 pages long, an entire Harry Potter novel. While these were, although I haven't read Harry Potter in a while, if anyone else has, then maybe you know better. But while there were differences based on institutional segment, the catalogs they examined ranged from over 200 pages to upwards of 400 pages. And this study just looked at community colleges, who perhaps are even more focused on, just getting that right pathway information for students. So can you imagine how long a catalog at a 4-year comprehensive research university might run? So aside from, just the sheer length of the catalog, students were also presented with a dizzying array of options, a buffet of sort of, information. To meet 10 to 11 requirements, student at the institutions they examine had to choose from 95 to 215 courses. This is a lot to navigate, even for the most well-resourced and well-informed student. Given all of this and what we talked about on the previous slide, I think Dr. O'Banion and Dr. Miles summed it up well when they said catalogs are crammed with information to make sure nothing is left out. However, this makes it extremely difficult to find what you're looking for and certainly doesn't put students' needs first. And so certainly there are some opportunities for institutions to think about how they can make their catalogs more student-friendly and easy to navigate. I've always felt that, from the perspective of a registrar or an executive on campus, building a really student-friendly catalog is just an incredible way to have that first touch with the students and to show that you really care. And it's interesting how much the kind of accreditation side of this and the want to, the fear perhaps of leaving information out of the catalog as a accreditation first document has caused perhaps this overload of impossibility for the student to navigate. Okay, we covered quite a bit on the catalog. And yeah, great. One of them I have to, a couple of questions I'll just answer here before we dive into demand. Read the catalog for reporting purposes. Yeah, totally. For those of you that are reading that catalog, makes perfect sense. And yeah, Andrea, this is an amazing point. It seems like there are dueling priorities, being nimble to adjust program offerings and policies quickly to adapt to evolving higher ed demands, and planning ahead to have changes in place for recruiting a year in advance of student start. And it's a fantastic point, and I'm sure many of you that are working on catalogs are constantly dealing with that duality. And I think that hopefully this webinar is a great opportunity for you on your campus to reassess where you're at on that and think about your perspective moving forward. Okay, let's shift gears. I want to spend some time now talking about how institutions are talking about class scheduling, course, and academic program demand. This is important for a number of reasons, and we'll look at how it's tied to institutional goals. We'll also look at how data is used and what types of data is used to understand demand for academic offerings. So I know that using data to inform academic offerings has been historically challenging for many institutions. However, increased urgency around competition, student enrollment, and a shifting labor market is changing the way leaders really think about how data should be used. So, one AACRAO survey respondent lamented that institutional culture around what classes to offer and how many seats is based on preference and historical scheduling. Data is often provided, but not used as expected to plan section offerings in all faculties. Some use data really well, while others do not. While it's great that institutions are getting to a place where they can access the data, getting folks to use it may be another story, just as this quote demonstrates. So let's look at some of the key areas academic demand analyses support institutional goals. You'll see these top two reasons both relate to course offerings. First, demand analyses help institutions create course schedules that ensure students can access classes they need for timely completion. This is an area we spend a lot of time thinking about, and I think it resonates with a lot of academic leaders that have traditionally been bound to faculty preferences or just rolling over the course schedule from the previous term. And this isn't just important for student access, but also for resource allocation. You'll see the number two reason on this list is more accurately predict resources needed to offer necessary courses. Approximately 85% of institutions said it was important to conduct program and course demand analyses to make resource allocation decisions, which makes a lot of sense. Think about how much money can be saved by reducing the number of underfilled sections offered. Similarly, offering more high demand courses can increase tuition revenue and student productive credits and ensure that students can get the classes that they need in order to graduate. I've always thought about this a little bit as Moneyball. For anyone who's watched the movie Moneyball, it's if you're flying blind, it's really hard to operate your institution in an effective way. So, Wendy, you'll see last that this ties nicely into other imperatives on this chart, such as budgetary considerations and decreasing under and overfilled sections. So, Wendy, I want to get your thoughts here. It seems like a lot of these institutional initiatives are tied to course scheduling and access. And we haven't talked about course scheduling as much during today's presentation, but I know that AACRAO recently wrapped up a comprehensive survey on course schedulings, and the findings are set to be released soon. Any early insights you can share with us that you think relate well to how institutions are thinking about course scheduling and why it's critical to get their offerings right?
Certainly, and I want to touch base on something before I answer that question, because you said that that catalogs is sometimes known as the bulletin, and we also are just conflating these terms of courses and classes, and it's been something that's this light bulb that came on as I'm going through both this report and the next one. Is like, wait a minute. For courses, some institutions, that means a program of classes or a group of classes, a course of study, or it can mean a course, the description of which resides in the academic catalog. And the class is what's been scheduled from that catalog into something so a student can register for it. There's a lot of overlap, but that's what AACRAO is currently working definitions on that, so that everybody knows when we're saying class, we mean that thing that a student can register for, and a course means what resides in the catalog. So it's been an interesting and eye-opening, wait a minute, there's lots of definitions for courses and classes and sections, and we're trying to get our hands around that. But the recent analyses that you refer to, and the report's going to come out in the middle of October, is very similar to what we're finding here with academic operations. So institutions or respondents to these surveys really want to be student-centric in their class scheduling practices. But we ask them about, okay, you want to be student-centric, are you, by their own measure, and what factors do you use to schedule classes? And from that, while most want to be student-centric, the factors that are used for class scheduling are not always that way. So there's some student-centric scheduling practices that we're finding coming up there, where they take the data, like we've been talking about here, the data on class demand and those kind of things, and they say, what do students need? There's some institutional centric factors that go into things like when they want to offer classes, when their buildings are open, and those kind of things for on-person classes. And then there's a considerable amount of faculty-centric factors that are going into these practices. And not to give anything away, but you'll have to see the report for that. But it's interesting how much is faculty-centric. So some of the comments here have said there's some faculty-centric influence on when a catalog is published. We're finding the same to be true for when classes are offered, when they're available for students to access them, where they're offered, like which classroom, and in what modality. So we're finding similar things.
That's a great point, Wendy. Okay, so if conducting analyses of academic offerings is so important, what are institutions actually doing? So just over a third, 38% of institutions use data to project both course and program demands. If you are one of those institutions, congratulations. That is definitely ahead of the curve for what we're seeing in the market. For the other 2/3, though, there is still some work to be done. 35% use data to project demand for one or the other, and 27% use data for neither. What I think is really interesting about this data, though, is that 55% of institutions don't use data to project program demand. This is pretty wild when you think about how rapidly the labor market and students' preferences are shifting. For one, think about, product market fit all the time. How are we adapting to universities? And I think similarly great and forward-looking institutions are doing the same. So let's take a look at just how rapidly, skills are actually changing in the labor force and how that can impact institutions. So Lightcast, formerly known as MC Burning Glass, recently put out a new report, and it highlighted some really fascinating information about the rate at which skills are changing across the labor market. Lightcast found in their analysis that since 2016, there was a 37% change in skills in job postings. So this means about a third of any given job posting looked completely different than 5 to 6 years ago. They also found that 1 in 5 skills listed in the job posting was entirely new to the job posting compared to the same job in 2016. So this rate of change is fascinating when you think about how programs and courses aren't changing within the same time period. This quote at the bottom of the slides from one of our partners, Dr. Jill Wright, AVP of Accreditation Assessment and Academic Surveys at Illinois Central College. And she noted that oftentimes by the time a new program is launched, it's already too late. An institution may realize after a couple of years of new labor market trends that a program needs to be modified, then takes 1 or 2 years to actually modify and implement the newly updated curriculum. By that time, job requirements have already changed again. So for those institutions that do use data to help project program demand, what types of data are they looking at and how does that work? So the first 2 pieces of data aren't surprising. Number of current students enrolled in a program and intended program declared by academic program. And I think some of these more student-driven ones at the bottom are more interesting to assess, such as time to completion by program, change in program by students in previous terms, student planning data. While this survey didn't directly ask about labor market data, some folks did write that in the other category response and listed data such as labor statistics, number of unfilled jobs, and national industry demand data as well. I'd be curious how many of the folks on the line use labor market demand data. So we're going to do another poll. To what extent do labor market trends influence which programs your institutions offer? And we'll leave this open for about 60 seconds. I was really excited to talk about this because I know many campuses are prioritizing thinking about career outcomes, learning outcomes, and making sure that their curriculum aligns with the job market, especially in the economy that we're in. And so really excited to see how institutions on the grounds are thinking about this. Awesome. And there's some great questions in the chat, on the catalog side of the house. And, definitely, I think we're, for anyone who has thoughts, feel free to, put your answers in the Q&A so we can make this as interactive as possible.
I can address the question about whether accreditors are requiring the components in the catalog, and that is a lot of what it is. There's many of the accreditors actually have mandatory things that have to be included in each of their catalog, and they vary from accreditor to accreditor.
Yeah, my personal experience with this is that different schools have different ways of interpreting accreditor's way of the accreditor's explanation of what kind of information needs to be reported. So I do think there's a lot of variation, but certainly my experience has been that there's significant opportunity to improve and make a catalog that's 10 times better for students within the constraints of accreditation purposes. Amazing. And great to hear from some folks who are in the, institutions performing program reviews that looked at retention and graduation data as well as BLS information. That's amazing. Okay. Great. Amy said, we need an option between somewhat and extensively. Some sensibly. Yes. Amazing. Let's see. Yeah, another one, with the job market influencing curriculum decisions, my institution jumps on whatever the hottest thing is. However, very little of that decision-making is based on data or consideration of logistics to make it happen. It's something that I know a lot of folks struggle with. I think, and our hope is with this webinar, this, really provides a helpful framework by which we can make an argument that academic operations is a lot more than perhaps on the surface it seems to be. And well-executed academic operations is at the heart of the university, right? When we start talking about what are the courses and programs we're offering, right? That is what our product is in a lot of ways. Okay, let's close that poll. Oh, did I miss the results? I'm not good at that. Did you see those results, Wendy?
Yes, it did.
Okay. What was your, I'm not good at that. So
there you go. They're back up there now.
There we go. Interesting. Any thoughts on that, Wendy?
I'm actually surprised that many have the labor market trends. That's actually great that they're taking that data and being responsive to the needs in the marketplace in that way. Doesn't overly surprise me though, from strategic enrollment management initiatives would say you got to look at your market data as well. We did have a question that keeps coming up a couple times in the Q&A, and if we have any good examples of excellent catalogs out there. And none popped to my mind, but I wanted to open it to you and to everybody else because it's come up a couple of times.
I have great examples that are Coursedog catalogs that I think are really amazing, and we're investing a lot in forward-looking, functionality that goes above and beyond just, incredible presentation of course program and pathway information. And, for those of you that are interested, I don't want to divert us by too much, but, Coursedog can show you a bunch of examples of what we kind of see. Just feel free to reach out to us and we're happy to send them. Okay. Let's jump to, let's talk about sources of data to project class demand. Amazing. So I do want to talk about, sorry, one second. Okay. So we've looked at program demand. I want to make sure we talk about course demand. Of institutions that do use data to project course demand, far and away the most popular data source is registration data from previous terms. This is certainly a good place to start, but I would classify more as low-hanging fruit since other sources might help give a more complete picture. A little less than 2/3 of institutions said that they look at which classes current students still need to complete their program and class and section fill rates. This is all great. After this, though, you'll see a sharp drop-off for all the other data sources. And what I think is more interesting, though, is that 20% of institutions look at class completion rates, a major indicator of student outcomes, which makes sense. And this seems like an area of improvement to me. And, we'd love to hear from folks on the line how, you're thinking about this. So this is going to be our final poll for the presentation part of this session. I'd love to know to what extent do course completion rates or DFW rates influence which courses your institution offers. So let's go ahead and launch the poll now. We'll leave it open for about 60 seconds or so, and we'll get some feedback. All right, we're running a little short on time, so I'm going to make sure that we get through this. Yeah, so most of you said somewhat, most of you somewhat or very little. Wow. Lots of thoughts on that, but I do want to make sure we get through the rest today and make sure that we get folks back to their offices on time. So let's hop forward if that's all right, Wendy. So for our final section today before Q&A, we're going to look at some of the barriers in academic operations. We'll look at what this means broadly, and then also what it means in terms of performing analyses of demand for academic offerings. So I know running all of these functions efficiently on your campus is easier said than done. We wanted to know what was getting in the way of administrators. There is no shortage of barriers, but AACRAO surveys showed that a few rise to the top. Lack of resources was a big one, lack of staff resources coming in at number 1, and lack of monetary resources coming in at number 3. Number 2 is pretty interesting as well. Other initiatives competing for the same resources. In our current, resource-constrained environments, this feels like a battle we're all fighting. I'd love to learn about how folks on the line have made the case for these initiatives and secured buy-in on campus, whether it's for structural change in publication timelines to, adopting, software like Coursedog to handle academic operations. Wendy, I'd love to get your perspective here. How do you think academic leaders can make a compelling case for academic operations initiatives on their campus? And what is at risk if they aren't able to address these initiatives?
To answer the first question, really is this getting feedback from the students. So the students who are using all of these resources, the degree audit planning tool, they're using the class schedule, they're using the catalog, is to gather data from those students and their engagement with those experiences. And those tend to be the ones that information tends to be the ones that gets people attention. So if you go to students and they say, I don't understand the catalog at all, or what catalog, or I never got it, that data from the student tends to be the driving factor, typically. But what's at risk if they aren't able to address those initiatives? Increasingly, students will make decisions based upon ease of service and access to the things they need to get their credential done, and they will choose to go someplace else. So I think that's going to be an increasing factor, is that students will choose to go elsewhere, that the information is more readily available.
Yeah, and one other that I might mention that I've heard from many campuses recently is actually staff retention, which I think is linked to staff resources. I do think that institutions that are progressively innovating on academic operations above and beyond just the rote, get it just in time delivery of processes to actually make it a student success function, are seeing way higher retention and staff happiness, which I think is really important in today's labor market. Okay, so last, we just talked about barriers for academic operations more broadly, but I now want to zoom in on specific barriers for, conducting analyses on demand. You'll see the most common barrier to performing course and program demand is time to perform the appropriate data analysis. I know this is a big one since everyone is dealing with competing priorities. I think if you look at the second and third most common reasons, it helps explains why folks don't have the time to conduct these analyses. 45% of institutions said they don't have the appropriate tools to analyze data. Without the right tools, it can be quite an involved process to track down all the data sources, try to collate them, do analyses, and deliver findings that are easily understandable to faculty and non-technical executives. And this is really only possible if you have folks on your side with the right skill sets who are on your staff and on your side in the framework at which you are looking at academic operations. So the third most common barrier was, staff with the expertise. So with all that said, I'd like to do a quick overview of how the right tools can help your institutions easily access the right data without spending an exorbitant amount of time relying on folks with specialized skill sets. So just in the last moment here, for those of you that aren't familiar with Coursedog, in 4.5 years, we're the market leader in this academic operations space. We work with about 150 campuses, serving 1.3 million students to deliver, predictive course demand projections, course completion rate analyses, financial analyses, academic scheduling workflow, curriculum, catalog management, and even kind of next generation catalog, pathway planning and search capabilities for students. Really appreciate everyone for joining. So we're going to take questions now. We have 5 minutes. For those of you, a little bit more, our website's there, but want to spend maybe the last 2 or 3 minutes answering questions. Wendy, do you want to dive into any of these? Let's see.
Take a look at them here. Just a couple of comments at the point. So a question for the group: do institutions tend to use in-house research regarding labor market data or outsource it to other companies? I can tell you from our understanding of those practices, it varies. If it's like the things we've been talking about here, limited staff resources available to do these analyses. So if you're a big, large, comprehensive research, one institution, you might be able to do it in-house, but a lot are having to go out to outsource that information.
Awesome. And yeah, just some other comments on, thinking about third parties as well. Awesome. Great question. Coursedog actually integrates with all major SIS systems. We're one of the first, to your specific question, Brian, we're one of the first who are actually doing a real API-based integration with Workday. We have Workday folks who came from Workday who are on our staff. We know the APIs, and we actually have schools who are live on Workday student who are Coursedog partners. Great question. Migrating from a legacy catalog solution to Coursedog, how long does it take, and data migration challenges? At a high level, it depends on the scope of the project. So if you just want to migrate your catalog from a legacy system to Coursedog system, you could be looking, just at the catalog alone, depending on how integrated you want the data and the scope of it, anywhere from 3 to 6 months. Data migration challenges, look, like not all schools have great data when it comes to their course or program or requisites in their SIS. And we've invested a lot in really powerful SIS integrations that are bidirectional, that keep data accurate in your system, and that make it so that when you update a course in Coursedog, when you update a section in Coursedog, we write that back to your SIS, so you don't have to be worried about the headaches of inaccurate manual duplicate data entry. Another question about gateway courses that can delay a student's time to graduation. This is a really interesting question for you, Wendy. I mean, there's some amazing frameworks out there pioneered by Complete College America about Momentum Year and other kinds of initiatives that have looked at this. I do think that having a really good understanding of these toxic course combinations and implementing some of those initiatives like Momentum Year can be a really effective mechanism to increase student progression, along with having robust reporting like you might get in Coursedog on program or pathway level time to graduation, and whether or not students are taking unproductive credits. Do you have any thoughts on this, Wendy? Or
I think you nailed it. So nothing I could add that would make that better.
Awesome. And then I'll take one or two more, but speaking to how to make faculty aware of policy changes so when they speak with their students, the message is consistent and accurate. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's really hard about this is a lot of campuses don't have good information about the impact of curricular changes and the way that impacts other parts of, like important parts of the curriculum, right? So you update a course, is that going to update a program? Is that going to update a degree map? Is that going to update a student's progression pathway? Coursedog provides that kind of reporting in workflow. So we help you to see, hey, here's a course, you update this course, let's update the program, let's update the SIS, let's update the degree map, and it'll show you all those interconnected links. So to answer your question, I think that, the best way I've seen this done is to really get good at building the muscle around impact. What is a substantial impact? How do we get the right stakeholders involved and focus on that, right? Because that's where I think you drive a lot of the, bang for your buck. And yeah, great question, Rachel. So definitely, we have a whole curriculum management system. So faculty can go in, submit course changes, program changes, pathway changes, syllabi changes. That goes through a workflow and governance process where we have digital workflow approvals, and you can report on if things have been done at a deadline and send out automatic agendas and email notifications and report on the history of curricular changes, and all of that writes back to Banner, all the SOSEC and the fun, different tables in Banner, so that when you update your course, it updates your catalog automatically based on the right effective date, and it updates Banner as well. Amazing. We are almost at time. I want to thank everyone so much for joining us, and especially I want to thank Dr. Kilgore for her contributions today. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. Oh, and if you are interested in learning about Coursedog, there's a poll number 5, which is right there in the chat. And you can just say yes, or you can say no, not at this time. We hope you enjoyed the dogs, and have a great day, everyone. And yes, Cindy, Coursedog does integrate with degree audit systems for demand projections, which is really powerful.
Thank you for having me, Justin. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Dr. Kilgore. Thanks, folks.